Hey everybody, welcome to Contra Talk. My name is Richard Henry, and my guest today is Brian Schuette. He is a lawyer out of Bowling Green, Kentucky. He's a friend of the ministry here, the channel, I guess, and really wonderful guy. He's been a lawyer for, how long have you been a lawyer now?
Very soon to be 31 years.
31 years. That's unbelievable. That's great. Well, welcome to the show, Brian.
Thanks.
Yeah. So you're married. You've got how many children?
I'm married to Christy. We've been married almost 32 years.
Okay.
And I have two children, a daughter 27 and a daughter 23.
Nice. And you practice law. You also have a ministry called the EXEC Project?
That's right, EXEC Project, which is kind of part of the law firm and maybe a little bit also standalone.
Okay.
So.
Wonderful. So practicing law for a long time out of Bowling Green. And where can people find you?
The law firm website is slg.legal.
Okay.
And then the EXEC Project is just execproject.com with the number 6.
Very good. And I remember when you first you found the channel and you emailed, I was like, why is there a lawyer emailing? I was like, are we getting sued or something like that? My webmaster, he was like, you might want to look at this. And I was like, oh man, what's going on? And it was a wonderful email, not a terrible email. So it's good.
People are rarely happy to heir from a lawyer, at least at first.
It's very true. It's very true. Well, again, thanks for taking time out of your day and joining me here. Why? We'll talk about a few different things. We're going to talk about kind of the SBC executive committee stuff somewhat, and what it means to waive client privileges and other things that are going on that a lot of people don't really know what exactly is happening or don't have a good grasp. But before we get there, why did you want to go into law? What prompted you to go into law?
So between my junior and senior years of high school, I went to summer school. I had this plan to graduate a semester early. It actually didn't work out, but anyway, that caused me to go to summer school. And one of the classes that's required in Kentucky, it's a civics class, but they just call it government.
Okay.
And I took that class, and we studied legal cases, and I was absolutely fascinated. And I decided then that I really think I wanted to be a lawyer.
Okay.
And so that was the path pretty consistently that I pursued over the next few years.
Okay. And where did you go to law school?
University of Louisville.
Louisville, okay.
Yeah.
Very good, very good. And would you have any words? I know, obviously, the climate of our world is quite different than it was 30 plus years ago. Would you still encourage, maybe young people watching this at some point to go into law, or is it still kind of like, well, maybe not, or absolutely not? What are your thoughts on that?
I kind of think of it in terms of spiritual commitments and calling.
Okay.
And, if you're a believer, you know that God has called you to do something, and He's gifted you to do something. And, I think like any other major decision or even minor decision, it's something that you should really seek the Lord's direction about. Mm-hmm. And He may not tell you, but He may direct your steps in such a way that it becomes clear to you what His plans are for you. And, whenever I've had opportunities to talk to young men who were wrestling with the question of whether they ought to go into ministry, and I always tell them, you should go into ministry only if you can't not go into ministry. Mm. And I would say, to a lesser degree, law practice is like that. Yeah, I don't know that being a lawyer is any harder than any other job. I think every job has its challenges and its parts that are fun. But I don't mean to give you a convoluted answer here. I guess I would say be a lawyer if you think that's the thing that you need to do.
Okay.
There is an abundance of ministry opportunity in law practice. I will say that.
Okay. Well, that's encouraging. Yeah, that's definitely encouraging for sure.
But like neither of my children are going into law.
Yeah.
One of them is married. The other one's engaged. Neither of their husband and fiance, respectively, are interested in law. And so I guess maybe my girls grew up watching the demands that law practice puts on a person. And there is a cost to the family of a demanding profession, and the law, if you do it right, is a demanding profession. So I'm not sure that they have much interest in it just because of what they saw.
Yeah. Okay. Off the cuff question: do you have to be good at arguing to be a good lawyer?
I think that's a bit of a misconception. People, if someone has an argumentative personality, they say, "Oh, you ought to be a lawyer."
Yeah.
I I consider what I do to be much more about problem solving
Okay.
than I do about arguing. And I guess different lawyers approach it in different ways. But the cases where I feel like I've done the best and the most good are those cases when I've been able to help people come together, even if there's an element of adversarial interaction to it. In the end, the goal is to get people to come together, and argument may be a small part of it, but that's by no means is that the largest part of law practice.
Okay. Well, that's good to know.
Yeah.
It's good to know. You want to talk a little bit about your Act 6, and then we'll jump into the kind of stuff that's going on with the SBC?
Sure.
So just tell us, why would someone benefit, or rather, what is Act 6, and would somebody watching or listening benefit from the services there?
So the Act 6 project is a nonprofit legal ministry. And what we do is we help churches in three main areas. We help churches with organizational documents. We help churches with some conflict resolution. And then we help churches with leadership training, obviously from a legal perspective.
Okay.
And I think the benefit to churches is to take advantage of the opportunity to use some legal tools in order to promote sound doctrine, to kind of build a wall around the church's sound doctrine and protect it, and to promote peaceful practices within the church, and then lastly to promote unity within the church. And it's been my experience, and I've worked with a lot of churches all over really the eastern half of the United States, but also some out west. And I have found that the churches that go through the process that we do, they experience those benefits.
Okay. Wonderful. No, that's very good. So you can reach out to Brian if you do need some services or even have some questions. Yeah, I've heard good things. Only from you, though, so I don't know.
Yeah,
It's
I
a
would
little biased. No.
Hear that with a grain of salt.
We're all biased, right? No, that's good. I appreciate you sharing that. With SBC stuff, so I'm SBC. I'm the SBC pastor. Are you guys in the SBC?
Yeah, we're a KBC church, and I think that makes us an SBC church. I go to Crossland Community Church in Bowling Green.
Okay.
Crossland.tv is the website for
Okay.
it. And I would describe Crossland as a very theologically conservative church that is maybe a little less conservative when it comes to methodology. Like we would have contemporary worship, kind of an emphasis on the life group approach, although we have recently started back with Sunday school classes. It's always been a space issue for us. It's a large church with 3 different campuses, a main campus in Bowling Green, and then campuses in Glasgow and Morgantown.
Okay.
But it's, consistently week in and week out, we get very sound preaching from the pulpit, and I've been there about 15 years now, and it's a remarkable place. I'm very devoted.
Yeah, praise God. That's good. So I know very little, and most people listening, watching, don't probably know a lot either as far as the legally stuff that's happening. Now, there's other things with, McLean Bible Church, David Platt's church, the church suing the leaders. We're not really going to touch on that unless you want to. But other churches have sued, or churches have been sued by their congregations and so on. And especially with the SBC right now, the SBC, just kind of for everybody, is there's a president, and he appoints the committees, and then they appoint other committees. And there's the executive committee, who isn't led by the president, but rather the CEO, which is kind of funny language, but it is what it is, led by a CEO of the executive committee. And there's been a lot of mishandling, a lot of suspicious things, and Brian's been following it more than I have. And especially, I know it was a couple months ago now, what was the lingo? They waived
So they waived the attorney-client privilege.
Okay.
So
Explain that a little bit.
Yeah, give you a little bit of background on that. So part of what we do, and it sort of falls into this conflict resolution heading, although it's really a little different, but generally, is some investigations. And so if there is an allegation of abuse, and I've handled a number of these, will come in and interview witnesses, examine, whatever evidence is available, and then advise the church on how best to approach that. Well, most of the interactions involving the attorney are privileged, under the attorney-client privilege, and that was the case with the investigations conducted at the request of the SBC of various matters. And I'm sure everybody that follows SBC issues is aware of the Houston Chronicle series of articles that exposed some issues related to abuse, and I'm certain that some of it is quite legitimate and does point to some serious issues. And the activists who are trying to influence the SBC's response to all of that have urged that the SBC should waive the attorney-client privilege, which would open up the investigative files to those who are seeking some sort of remedy against the SBC or SBC entities or individuals, and that's really what the waiver of attorney-client privilege issue is all about.
Okay, and so is that a common thing that people do, or is that, does it kind of depend on the situation? I remember listening to that and then seeing some responses from people and really kind of scratching my head thinking, well, does that make sense or does it not make sense? Again, not a lawyer, most people aren't. And most people, we want to give advice or just speak about something, especially in our modern day, without really having much idea what we're even talking about. So is that like a normal thing or no?
No, it's a very unusual thing to waive the attorney-client privilege.
Okay.
Because the attorney-client privilege is there for a number of reasons. In the civil context, it's there to protect communications and to encourage candor. There are lots of ways to approach an issue, and sometimes someone can be on the outside looking at just select facts and come to a conclusion that isn't really the correct conclusion, if a person is able to look at all of the facts. And what the attorney-client privilege does is it allows people to communicate freely and, even to communicate mere suspicions, and it'll establish a direction for an investigation. And going through the investigation, it's not at all unusual to begin with a suspicion and it not pan out. A recent investigation that I've done, there was a real question and a suspicion that maybe a staff person at a church had mishandled a matter. It wasn't a question of that person's misconduct or anything like that, but there was a matter that was reported at the church, and the first suspicion was that perhaps this church leader handled the matter in a way that was more calculated to conceal it than to actually address it. Once we got into it, and I interviewed, half a dozen witnesses at some length. Once we got through that process, it became clear that this leader had handled it very well. He had really done everything that he should have done, and in fact, in a lot of ways, his response was a model of how someone should respond. Now, if there had not been the protection of the attorney-client privilege, those suspicions would have been the thing that everybody pays attention to.
Yeah.
And if you think about, in the Me Too culture, and the kind of the believe women mantra, suspicion and allegation has taken the place of evidence and of facts. I kind of look at the Kavanaugh Supreme Court confirmation as a bit of an inflection point in our country, because it's the first time, in my observation, that the whole idea of the facts not really mattering, only the allegations mattering, came to the forefront. And there are many people, I think it's part of the postmodern mindset of there not really being any such thing as truth-only perspective. That's the first time that mindset has really come to the forefront, and I think it's defining much of our public discourse now.
Yeah.
And so to kind of connect that to the attorney-client privilege, if you take something that's just a suspicion or an allegation and you put that out, then those who have an agenda are going to clamp onto that, and that's going to become their narrative,
Yeah.
as opposed to allowing a process to take place. And, due process is a biblical notion. A person couldn't be convicted except on the testimony of two or more witnesses. That's even embedded in our criminal law now. And there's a reason for that. And it is that, allegation alone should not ever be a substitute for truth. And if you take away the attorney-client privilege, then you short circuit that process. And I think it plays into the hands of activists who have more interest in pursuing a narrative than they do in pursuing the truth. And that's the problem. I don't think you'll find any lawyer, aside from a handful of activist lawyers, who would say that waiving the attorney-client privilege is a good idea. And just to put it in perspective, the law firm that had been representing the executive committee for over 50 years resigned over the waiver of the attorney-client privilege.
Wow.
And if I had been in that position, I think I would do the same thing. Wow. Because it's such an ill-advised decision, because it opens the doors to people that won't handle things responsibly, and they do not have the same goal as that the executive committee, as an entity of the Southern Baptist Convention has. The SBC is an organization that is about the gospel and about supporting churches and supporting international mission efforts and also national mission efforts. Well, that's not the goal of the activists that were agitating for the waiver of the privilege.
Yeah.
In fact, some would suggest, and I think I would probably be among these, that the activists are probably intent on taking down the SBC, of tearing down institutions. That's very much a part of where we are in our culture now, is tearing down institutions, and that's, I think, a part of that whole postmodern agenda, to tear down and replace, and that has now arrived at the doorstep of the SBC.
Wow.
So we don't yet know what the impact of that's going to be, but I don't think it'll be a good thing. I don't think it's going to foster an inquiry that leads to the discovery of truth, that allows well-intentioned and properly motivated people to do justice in the face of legitimate harms that have been done to people.
Wow. Now they obviously had a different team of lawyers. Replace the one that had been representing for 50 years. I thought I read that law firm also supports like the Human Rights Campaign and a few other like leftist. Or is
I'm not familiar with.
I might be mixing that up.
Well, I'm not familiar, but what I will say is look at what's happened with the Boy Scouts. Okay, once the these activists trained their sights on the Boy Scouts, they pushed it into bankruptcy.
Yeah. Wow.
And so the Boy Scouts I think it's called Scouting USA now, or something like that. They're in Chapter 11 bankruptcy because there was this flood of claims against them. And so really what waiver of the attorney-client privilege does is it opens the floodgates to the trial lawyers to come in and decimate the SBC and to gain access to the money that the SBC has accumulated over the years for mission purposes. And I am a trial lawyer. I do that kind of work in my private practice, and so I'm not denigrating trial lawyers necessarily, but we see oftentimes activist-driven litigation, and sometimes the truth gets lost in the shuffle of postmodern narrative. Not to be so philosophical, but that's what I see as the real risk of waiving the attorney-client privilege. Not the truth that's going to come to light, but the narratives that are going to find support in mere allegation and in allegations of concealment, and that it's just not a good substitute for a process that is designed to discover the truth and to do justice.
Yeah. No, I appreciate you sharing that, because a lot of people don't. You hear and you think, well, that doesn't sound right, but am I only hearing it as a lopsided view, or I'm not really understanding what's going on, or why would they do this or that? But that's, It's so true with just the destroying institutions. I mean, we've seen this for, years now, but especially in the last 4 to 5 years with, removing statues and changing names and doing this and this. And, it's basically trying to rewrite history. And I know, and it's such a terrible argument really, but when people kind of say, well, that's, you can't just say it's a slippery slope, or, oh, you're just being an alarmist, or it's like, yeah, but wouldn't you rather somebody say, hey, there's a fire, when they think they see smoke and it's a false alarm, as opposed to sleeping and smelling smoke, seeing smoke, and it is a fire, and now you perish in that fire because you were a fool to not step up and, get out of your bed or something. Clearly, we don't want to be looking for demons under every rock and tree, but at the same time, I think we live in a time where, even with things with Ukraine or with all the COVID stuff, and it's like, well, that's just, people dismiss too easily. And it's like, hold on, these same people were saying this, now they're saying this. And we shouldn't just latch on to whatever the current narrative is, but rather try and step back and think more critically and not just believe allegations, like you're saying.
We don't have to speculate over what's going to happen as a consequence of the waiver of the attorney-client privilege by the executive committee. We can predict with a high degree of confidence that lawsuits will follow, and that the SBC assets will be consumed in part by the effort to defend, probably by battles with insurance companies, because insurance companies, they have to provide a defense, but they may not feel like they should pay, to indemnify, pay any damages that the executive committee is required to pay, because a lot of these allegations involve allegations of active wrongdoing as opposed to negligent wrongdoing, and oftentimes there's no coverage for that, or there can be a big insurance coverage battle. But at the end of the day, what will happen is you'll see probably a large number of people and law firms who will organize an effort to pursue the SBC based on allegations that, whether they're proven or not, will have a terribly corrosive effect on the ministry of the SBC.
Wow. And so, again, kind of like I'm 5 or 6 years old, why? So they remove the attorney-client privileges, and which then, is it erases kind of a confidentiality, sort of you can talk off the books type of thing?
It opens the files of the investigators.
Okay.
And so, when I'm investigating a case, I may make notes based on, a belief that I have at one point in the case, but then as I gain more information, that belief may not be borne out by the facts. Well, if you take someone that's constructing a narrative based on an agenda, again, not a truth-seeking approach, but a narrative-driven approach, they may seize upon, something that was a mere suspicion and treat it as though it were a fact. And
Gotcha.
if that happens, which is what does happen in these situations, it becomes very difficult to defend. I mean, think about Twitter mobs, or think about cancel culture. Sometimes those aren't even based on the truth. Mm-hmm. And when that happens, it decimates the people that are the object of that. And I think that's what some in this activist group are going to do to the SBC. And wow. It's not a good thing. It isn't going to make people safer. It's not going to make children safer. It's not going to make women subject to abuse in the church safer. There are ways to do that, and those things should be done. Mm-hmm. But decimating the SBC, in my opinion, is not the way to do it.
Yeah. I mean, the SBC obviously has large sums of money from donations and giving from cooperating churches.
Right.
I mean, anywhere from 40 to 50,000. It's hard to really put an actual exact number on it, because I hear different numbers, but it's big. But based on even kind of so goes the SBC, or how the SBC goes, so goes even evangelicalism to a degree. Maybe not in this exact same way, but you have, like you said earlier, the removal and the trying to change or dismantle institutions. And it's not dismantle institutions because institutions are bad. It's we want to bring up a new institution, out of the ashes like a phoenix rises, and we're all going to be better. And that's a very secular, naturalistic way to look at something. Never did a building arise out of a rubble heap. You have to clear it, clean it, do this, put a new foundation, and put thought and energy into that building. And a building never built itself, right?
And it's unlikely to be built in accordance with the same design.
Yeah.
Right. I think at the core of what the activists want to do is to tear down and to replace with something that reflects modern sensibilities, modern sort of secular cultural sensibilities, because that is creeping into the SBC and to a variety of denominational organizations. And let me make a point here and tie this to the work I'm doing with Act 6. So the SBC is I guess in a sense a parachurch organization. It's not a local church.
Right.
It is an organization that's been developed to support local churches. And I would say on a local or state level here, we have the KBC, Kentucky Baptist Convention. And my experience with the KBC is uniformly positive. They really do a wonderful job of supporting pastors and other ministries. And, I would laud their work without hesitation. But they're not the local church. Mm-hmm. And so, it's not an either or. It's a both and. We should protect and promote both the parachurch organizations like the KBC and the SBC, but our highest level of attention and effort should be devoted to the local church, because it is the local church that God has ordained with the purpose, of being the visible body of Christ in a given community.
Yeah.
And and that's the reason that I pursue my efforts through the Act 6 project, because I see and recognize the unique value of a local church. Mm-hmm. And I think that's clearly the organization that God has ordained to do the work of the Great Commission at a local level. It starts with the family. That's the most fundamental building block. And then it moves to the church, and then kind of out to the side is government.
Yeah.
God has ordained each of those institutions for his sovereign purposes. And organizations like the SBC and the KBC are beneficial to come alongside local churches, but the local church is what's at the front line.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, and that's a good point. And I think a lot of times we have such a top down, or upside down rather, view of a lot of these matters, because we think, well, it's a both end of, well, that's not, excuse me, not happening in my church now, so we're not worried about it. But there's this trickle down effect with, maybe Bible study resources, Sunday school resources, even books that are being promoted and so on. And or we then think, well, we can't influence the top, so, we're powerless. I'm not going to go to the convention. I'm not going to be a part. I'm not going to speak out on this or that. I'm not going to do whatever to help encourage and strengthen the local church. But really, I mean, again, like you said, the local church is what's ordained, not the PCA or the SBC or the evangelical free denomination or Calvary Chapel or whatever. It's, yes, those are churches, but they're a collection of churches, whereas the actual local church is vital, and having solid leadership, biblical leadership, and a biblical framework, which is what you guys there at Act 6 help set up, even like church bylaws and constitution and things like that, right?
That's right. That's right. And it's all built on the conviction that the local church occupies a unique role.
So you mentioned with the waiving of the privilege, we can kind of anticipate how things will go based on other factors and how people have done this in the past. What should we expect as a local church, a local SBC church, or just even an observer, like, well, I'm not SBC, so it doesn't really affect me very much. What should we expect things to look like maybe for the next couple conventions in the summertime, and just other news stuff to watch out for?
My hope is that at this year's convention, which is in Anaheim, you're close to your stomping ground, that they'll reconsider the issue, and that the messengers will direct the executive committee to take that issue back up and to reverse that decision. Now, what we don't know is what's been done, in view of the waiver of the attorney-client privilege. And one of the problems with that waiver is that maybe the executive committee as a group has chosen to waive it, but in doing that, they're waiving protections that individual members of the executive committee were relying upon. And so it's not really fair. It's like me waiving your constitutional rights in a case. And I don't think that is in line with the expectations. Maybe a prospective waiver, a waiver from that date forward, but not a retrospective waiver.
Yeah.
And my hope is that the messengers will reconsider that issue. I'm not sure that they made a particularly informed decision when they. I don't know that the executive committee made the best decision. And I think what they did is they capitulated to the activists, and that never, ever, ever goes well.
No.
So we should determine what is the right thing to do, and do that irrespective of whether we experience criticism from it.
Yeah.
Because capitulating to bullies or activists only sends them into a feeding frenzy, and if it stands and if they open the files. Then I predict that doesn't go well for the SBC and its institutions.
Wow. Okay. Well, that's good to know. You have any other thoughts on anything else you want to share with us at the moment?
The issues with our institutions, denominational institutions, for us as Baptists, get a lot of attention.
Yeah.
And, they're interesting. I think they're things that we should give some attention to, and they're not unimportant. However, I would, if I'm ranking issues, it's far more important that we pay attention to how we are leading our families. It is far more important to pay attention to how we're leading our churches or participating in the ministry of our churches. And those two areas will have far greater impact than anything that happens with denominational institutions like the executive committee or the International Mission Board or any other entity. So let's give it some attention, give it the attention that it's due, but let's remember our local efforts are always going to have more impact.
Yeah, that's good. No, I appreciate that. Well, thank you for joining me, and maybe we'll talk again more.
I appreciate the opportunity, Richard.
Absolutely. Thank you. All right, y'all. Well, you guys have a good rest of your day, and check out Brian's ministry, acts6project.com. And what was your lawyer website?
slg.legal.
slg.legal. Check out that if you do need legal issues, or rather maybe some questions answered or something like that. I don't know if he does a lot of Q&As there, but you can probably find some resources there, or a good email. Reach out to him, and definitely Act 6. I've heard, like I said, you've shared a lot of good testimonies and stories about helping local churches, which definitely is your part, which is wonderful. So thanks so much. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Richard.
Bye.